Hello, everyone. I'm Jacob Nordby. I'm your host for today's session, and it's really such a pleasure to introduce Meredith in just a moment here. Meredith has been part of our writing community at Heal Plus Create. She's joining us for the retreat in Santa Fe in a couple of weeks. Oh my God, we're down to just a couple of weeks. And I've gotten to know Meredith through her work and also learning more about the jobs that she's had in this field of wellness writing. And so I'm just so excited to share this. When Meredith proposed this workshop a few months ago, and my first answer might have surprised her. My first answer was, absolutely, I want that, because it's such an interesting area. And I won't comment on a lot because I know Meredith has plenty to share with us about that. If you're just joining us, welcome. We're just now getting started. Here, it's awfully nice to see you here from Ireland. I bring that up because I know that you have to stay up and be here. So thanks for being here. Thank you all for being here. Let me just tell you who Meredith is. So Meredith, sometimes known as Mare, Morckel, is a writer, teacher, creative consultant, storyteller, speaker, and reluctant optimist who uses her words to educate, entertain, and empower. She earned her Bachelor of Arts in Writing and Psychology from Bluffton University and her Master of Arts in Professional Writing from New England College. During work hours, she's a health and wellness blogger for WebMD. She runs the WebMD Fibromyalgia Community Group on Facebook. She also writes for healthday.com and previously worked for the Cleveland Clinic. By night, she writes fiction, nonfiction, poetry, songs, character-guided journals, and nonsense. Mare is passionate about ceaseless self-improvement, books, mental health, social media, music, dogs, and epic kindness. Visit her at her website at maremorkel.com, and I'll make sure there's a link to that in the chat in a little bit. All right, so Mare, it is your time on stage.
Jacob, thank you so very much.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm going to ask you to turn your video on so we can see you.
Let me see. I was actually trying to share my screen first.
There we go.
Here's the thing. Every good class has got to have a tiny bit of technical problems. Have you noticed that? I feel like that is nothing but good luck. So I am bringing up a PowerPoint and
Mare,
Jacob,
just let me say that I'm no longer co-host or host, so you'll just have to kind of keep an eye on who's trying to get in. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
I will do my best. Tell me what you see, Jacob. Do you see my face? Do you see a PowerPoint?
I see your face and a PowerPoint.
You do? Is it mint and green and pretty?
It is, but you could expand it to fit the full screen and then we won't see your notes or agendas or anything.
Aha. Full screen, display settings. Let's see. Full screen, full screen. Where do I do that? Let's see
I think
here.
underneath the slides, there's one that if you click on the tile looking one, it should expand right next to the pen. Let's see if that will expand it to fit the screen. Oh, now we're seeing all of it.
No. Jacob, I think
You know what?
media options at the very top of the screen. At least on mine, that's how it works.
I think I have to switch. I think I have to swap. What did that do?
Now it's good.
Is it good now?
It's good.
Wonderful. So what I'm going to have to do, everyone, is every once in a while, I'm just going to jump ship very briefly so I can make sure that we are getting everyone in the waiting room, because I want to make sure that nobody is left out. And I want to make sure, oh, there we go. Maybe I don't have to jump out. Waiting room, participants. Now I can see them. Cool. Thank you so very much for your patience, everyone. All right, here we go. Thank you, Jacob. That's such a lovely introduction. I want to point out, everyone, that I only paid him $50 for that presentation, for that introduction, but that was a good $100 worth of an introduction. I appreciate that, Jacob. I'm kidding. So hello, everyone. My name is Meredith, and I am a health and wellness writer. Real quick, everybody is muted. That's on purpose. Don't take it personally. I'm going to be sharing my screen for a while, and I do invite you to be on the chat. Please have conversations with each other. Please enjoy lots of conversations with each other, but I won't be there. I am not quite one of those teachers who can multitask yet. So I'm going to focus on my notes. But if you look at the bottom of this screen, there is my email address. When we get to the end of this class, if you still have questions, if you still want to give feedback, or if there's anything you want to know more about our retreats, about Heal Plus Create, about a writing room collective, please feel free to email me. I'm so very happy to look into that for you. So we are going to get started by talking about how you can save lives with just your words. Now, I think I heard somebody say that they joined this class because of that title. And I don't blame you. That class is a little what you might call clickbaity. Catches your attention, doesn't it? But the first thing I want to say to you today is that even though that's a big claim that your words can save lives, it is not inaccurate. It's not that it's not truthful. And this is the part where I'm going to pause and I'm going to check on the folks in our waiting room. Jacob and I were trying earlier to make sure that he could be co-host while I was the host. And we weren't quite able to figure that out. So again, everyone, thank you so much there we go. Thank you so very much for your patience as we figure all of this out. Let's see. Let's see here. I want to see the waiting room participants. I want to see who is currently in the waiting room. You guys are being so patient. I am so grateful. Thank you. Let's see here. Hey, Jacob, question for you.
Mm-hmm.
If I make you briefly the host again, could you toss it back to me?
You know, if you've clicked on the participants, unless there is someone in the waiting room, you won't see anybody. So you're probably good. And now that the class has started, if you
yeah,
didn't get here on time, they'll catch the replay. So you don't have to worry about it.
You know what? That's a good point. They're going to miss out on seeing my lovely face live, but they can see it in slow motion. They can stop and look at each individual frame if they want. All right, guys. Again, I am so grateful that you are being so patient with us. Okay. All right. So, as Jacob mentioned, I do not have a medical degree. In fact, my degrees aren't even in science. And before I was a health and wellness writer, the only thing that I knew on the subject was that the Wilma Flintstone vitamins are better than the Fred Flintstone vitamins. Do you remember those? That's all I knew. But today, I am going to talk to you about what health and wellness writing is, how to do it, and briefly, I'm going to tell you how you can begin to make a career out of it. So I'm going to start to say that later on, I'm going to tell you personal stories that I know of and that I have experienced where words have saved lives. But I want to begin by saying one way that your words can save lives is that they can do the same thing that 4 letters on a sign above a door can save lives during a fire. The word exit. Consider that with me for a moment. That word is a noun. That word tells you that this is a location. This is where you exit. But that word does something else. You can also look at that word as a verb. That word will also tell you that this is the action you need to take. So, as a noun, it tells you a location. As a verb, it tells you, hey, you need to take this action in this direction. You need to exit. So, today you're going to learn about the 4 goals of health and wellness writing. The first 2 are what the exit sign does. The exit sign educates and it empowers. It tells you where to go and it tells you what to do to exit. Now, since you're all probably already a little bit bored with my voice, I want to mix it up and I'm going to tell you a little fictional story. I am at heart a storyteller. While I'm telling this story, go ahead and listen for 3 different things. Number 1, listen for great communication. Number 2, listen for poor communication. And number 3, listen for times when the characters are educated or empowered. So once upon a time, 2 brothers who were twins lived off the coast of Massachusetts. Their names were Arnold and Hector. Both quit school after 7th grade and went to work on fishing boats. One day when they were 25, Arnold and Hector looked at their hands and they saw these tiny red dots. After a while, the dots turned purple and these blisters started popping up. So they went to see their doctors. Arnold went to see Dr. Burns. Hector went to see Dr. Pierce. If you get that reference, we are now best friends. When Arnold went into Dr. Burns's office, he saw a poster. And at the top of that poster, it said a complicated sentence. Please stay vigilant for ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke symptoms. Now, someone with a 7th grade education isn't going to understand that. Arnold didn't know hemiplegia, asthenia, any of the other words on this poster. But meanwhile, Hector went into Dr. Pierce's office and he also saw a poster. At the top, it said, if you don't feel good, act fast to see if you're having a stroke. And then the letters FAST were large and clear. He learned F is for face, A is for arm, S is for speech, T is for time. And later on, I'm going to tell you a very important story about that poster. So later, Arnold sat in the waiting room at Dr. Burns's office and he saw a TV show about something called lymphangioliomyomatosis. He heard other strange words called annihilate, biopsy, and Arnold wondered who wrote this script. In the meantime, Hector learned about LAM, LAM, lymphangioliomyomatosis. LAM is short for that. Then they both went to their exam rooms. They met with the doctors, and Burns said, "You have erythematous epidermis and vesicles." Dr. Pierce said the exact same thing. "You have red skin and you have blisters." Poor Arnold, he was confused. Hector wasn't. So the doctors did some tests. Burns said, "You have Mycobacterium meridium. You have a disease related to contact with vertebrata and need antibiotics." Pierce said, "You have germs and you have something called fish handler's disease." And he said, "Hector, do you happen to spend time around fish?" Now, Dr. Burns, he was helpful. He got a pamphlet out of a box on the wall, handed it to Arnold, and he looked at the word treatment, and it said, "Purchase OTC topical antibiotic ointment. Apply 3 times every 24 hours. Ingest oral antibiotics as prescribed. Take acetaminophen as needed." Arnold, again, had no idea what that meant. And Dr. Burns wrote him a prescription, dropped it in his lap, and he walked out of the room. Arnold knew very few words on that prescription and none that the doctor had scribbled. Poor Arnold. Meanwhile, Pierce's pamphlet that Hector looked at had some very, very clear instructions. Hector learned what medicine, where to get it, and how to use it. And eventually, those symptoms that Hector had, they all went away. But Arnold just ignored all of the symptoms, and eventually he got sick, fever, chills, his joints hurt. He went to the hospital, found out he had an infection in his hand that had gotten into his blood. So they gave him medicine. They put him on oxygen. They even had to do a process called dialysis because his kidneys stopped working. And the doctors told him that if he hadn't gotten treatment then, he would have died. But fortunately, both Hector and Arnold lived. Don't worry. But you can see in that story that there can be consequences if there's not proper communication. So in that story, we saw posters, we saw the scripts for the television, we saw the conversations between doctor and patient, and we saw the pamphlet. Now, those are examples that we covered in our story, but there are other places where you can find this type of content. For example, websites, magazines, they're in advertisements, social media, and more. And in addition to education, and in addition to empowerment, health and wellness writing does so much more. Let's back up for a second. The FAST posters, FAST, what I created is actually a derivative of the original content created by the American Stroke Association. If you recall, health and wellness writing needs to educate, and that's what this part of the poster does. But this is what was in Dr. Burns's office. Health and wellness writing. and this is vital, needs to be written at a 7th grade education, no more sophisticated than a 9th grade education. As you can see, a 7th grader wouldn't know droopage, hemiplegia, any of that. Meanwhile, if we look at the FAST poster that was in Dr. Pierce's office and some additional content that I added as well, it asks, can you feel the skin on your face? Can you feel the muscles? Do they move? Can you look at your face and see if it's uneven, lopsided? Let's go to the A. Again, a 7th grader would know arm, would likely know weakness, especially if we describe it as being extra tired. Now the S, that's a little more complicated. An adult with a 7th grade education would probably know what drunk slurring sounds like, but a kid, at least I hope not, would not know that. So if this piece of content was in a pediatrician's office, it wouldn't be appropriate, but it is in Pierce's office. Finally, we get to T. This is where we see the empowerment. 911 is a tool, and we're being told how to use it correctly. So if we consider that the first three letters are symptoms, you might consider the letter T to also be a symptom. But here's where there's a little bit of problem with this content. If you are reading that, you may think to yourself, okay, all of these are symptoms. This says to call 911, but it doesn't say why to call 911. It doesn't say because you have these symptoms, call 911. It could mean that you do not. It is confusing, which is why goal number 3 is that we need to be specific. Now, we're going to pause here. We're going to do a little exercise, give you a little bit of practice. And while you guys are doing that, Jacob and I are going to work on seeing if we can get a couple more people in through the waiting room. Got a couple texts. They are anxious to get in here. So I am going to show you a paragraph, just a couple sentences. And what I want you to do is see if this content accomplishes those first 4 goals. Does this content educate? Does it empower? Does it use a language that a 7th grader would understand? And is it specific? So we're going to give you about 5 minutes here. Going to press pause on everything. And I am starting the timer now. There we go. All right, Jacob, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. So
Okay.
can everyone. So if you just click on participants, it'll
Yeah.
open up the panel. Yeah.
Oh, I see it now. Okay. Waiting room, admit all. Welcome, everyone who just joined us from the waiting room. So sorry you had to wait a few minutes. As a group, we are now doing a brief practice where they are looking at a piece of content that is an example of health and wellness writing. And what everybody in this class is doing right now is they're asking themselves if this content is appropriately meeting the first 4 goals of health and wellness writing. And I'll just state those really quick since you kind of missed it. It will come up again. But real quick, the first 4 goals are to educate, to empower, and to use appropriate language specifically for a 7th grader. And then also to be specific. These are absolutely vital goals for anybody who needs to not only read health and wellness content, but of course to comprehend it as well. So we have about 2 or 3 more minutes of this practice, and then we will dive back in. I'm going to speak very softly, so hopefully I don't startle you. If you have any questions about that practice we just did, again, send me an email. For those of you who haven't gotten my email yet, it's going to be shown at the end of the class, so don't worry, you'll be able to get it. So we just learned what health and wellness writing is. We're not talking about medical journals. We're not talking about research content. We're talking about things that you see in an article on a website and on the wall at your doctor's office. Now, how do you do this content? It is harder than it looks. Let's take a look at some content that I actually did very recently for a Facebook group that I lead for WebMD. the content doesn't just get written, of course. The other side of the coin of health and wellness content is that you have to do research. So for this project, I assigned myself the question, what are the best exercises for someone with fibromyalgia? So what I did is I dove straight into Google. That is where we start. But before I hit that search button looking at fibromyalgia and exercises, I made sure that I was only seeing the .orgs, not the .coms. I also used the toolbar to make sure that I was only looking at content that has come up, either been published or updated within 5 years. First thing I saw after I got past the sponsored content, of course, was Mayo Clinic. Mayo Clinic, top hospital in the nation, awesome content. The big hospitals, Cleveland Clinic, Johns Hopkins, those are the best. The next website I saw, I wasn't familiar with. It turned out to be associated with Columbia University. They have a medical school. Medical schools, great content for the type of writing we do. Finally, I saw frontiersin.org. Medical journals, that's where you find them. One of the places you find them. And in the Frontiers in Psychology medical journal, I learned about exercises for fibromyalgia. So what did I do next? Next is the reading frenzy. I dove into these top three sources, started reading. Now, these sources are different, but I can tell that they have referred to appropriate sources because they were very similar. And what I wanted to do, because there are some differences, so I wanted to focus on what they had in common. These three all said, yes, that exercise is important for people with fibromyalgia. They all said walking, swimming, biking is the best. They all said that you need to talk to your doctor before you start a brand new exercise program. So what I could do with all this information, well, that could be it right there, but that's not writing. We need meat, don't we? So what I did is I divided my content into 6 sections. Why, what, how, the intro, then the why, how, followed by the what, the conclusion, and the sources. And I'm going to show you what I came up with. The intro, when you're experiencing the pain and fatigue of fibromyalgia, asking you to exercise may sound like telling you to hit your leg with a hammer. Exercise does make fibro pain and fatigue worse at first, but the right exercise, the right number of minutes done the right number of times will help you feel better. How does this exercise help? It helps you not hurt as bad. It helps you feel less tired and build your strength. It helps you stay on your feet longer and have a more enjoyable, healthy life. Then I go on to say the 3 best exercises, followed by how to do those exercises, which is very slowly, starting with 3 minutes and moving up from there. And then I finished with saying what all of the authors in the sources said. Pace yourself, be very careful, talk to your doctor. So, what we have here is a tiny bit of health and wellness writing, but it accomplishes all four of our goals. This educates, this empowers, it uses very plain seventh grade language, and it is specific enough that people who read this content will be able to move forward with the first steps of their exercise routine. Now, I'm the type of person where I want the time I spend to be meaningful. I want to get to the end of my workday and I want to feel not just like I earned money and did something I love, like writing. I love to get to the end of my workday and to know that I helped people. When I first started as a health and wellness writer, I had recently finished my master's degree, but I was one of the few people on staff who had a master's. Some people had bachelors, but none of us had medical or science degrees. Now, on the topic of a career, I already showed you this slide, but I want to show it to you again because the healthcare industry needs proofreaders, formatters, editors, and of course, writers for online articles, for books, for magazines. They need that content so that doctors can have better, more effective, and helpful conversations with their patients. Now, another company that I worked for was called Patient Point. Next time you go into an exam room at your doctor's office, or God forbid, you're in a hospital, see if there is a big iPad on the wall that has educational information in it. Those big screens are meant for doctors to use to communicate with patients. So I would write things like quick facts, just 3 interesting things about a diagnosis or about symptoms or about the treatment. Then we would put up infographics on these screens that would go into even deeper information. And that would be followed by guides, another deeper dive into these medical conditions, diseases, and syndromes. We would get messages all the time from doctors who would tell us how wonderful it was that they could explain this type of content to patients correctly, accurately, without having to use all of that medical jargon that is nothing but confusing to you and me. After that, I worked for a company called Health Day. This was a bit of a deviation as it was news reports, interviewing, and basic journalism. This is another type of health and wellness writing. So For instance, I would write about acupuncture. I would interview, I would talk to doctors, I would find out all of the jargon that is used for that particular procedure. Take it all, transform it into content that we can understand. And here's the thing about health and wellness writing. It could be argued that it's purely technical. You could argue that it's purely science, but you can get a little creative. There are other parts of yourself and other parts of your writing skills that you can put to use. So, for example, with the acupuncture article that I did, the doctor spoke to me about meridians. They spoke to me about the different locations where the needles would go. And they talked to me about how the chi would be blocked. Again, like Arnold, I was confused. But using all those resources that I just taught you about, I was able to understand what they meant. And then I was able to take that understanding and get a little creative with it. So instead of talking about chi, meridians, I talked about how they were like rivers flowing through your body. And if something fell on this river like a tree trunk and dammed it up, that is what would cause problems in the body. So when people read that content, they not only understand it better, but they may even be slightly entertained. I promised you that I would tell you a couple stories about how health and wellness writing save lives, a couple specific stories. I have two. And they both go back to the poster that I showed you earlier from the Stroke Association. FAST is a common acronym that's been floating around doctors' offices for years. Maybe you found yourself in a waiting room, maybe a little bored, and you've looked around and maybe you've seen a poster or a pamphlet or even a TV show that has scripts about FAST looking for the warning signs of a stroke. When I was at Patient Point, we got a letter from a doctor that said that another person on our staff who made a similar acronym, not about stroke, but about heart disease, they saw that content on one of our screens. When they started having those symptoms, they remembered it, went straight to the ER and got help. My second story is my best friend. She had symptoms of a stroke, and she knew it right away because of the FAST acronym. When she recognized what was happening, she immediately called 911. She immediately went to the emergency room and she immediately got treatment. So instead of devastating paralysis, instead of brain injury that you don't come back from, instead of possible death, because of that acronym, she got the treatment that prevented all of that. Nowadays, the only only permanent reminder of that stroke is slight numbness in her ring finger. That is all she has. And she was saved because of those words. Now we are at the point in our day where I want to draw your attention again to my email address. If you have questions, if you want any more guidance regarding the practice that we did, again, if you have questions about a writing room or about Heal Plus Create, or if you just want to talk shop, talk more about how you can build a career in health and wellness writing, more about how your words can save lives, I would be delighted to hear from you. Also on there is my link tree. Go to that site and you will see all of my other links, my website, my social media links, everything. And when you go to my website, there are additional examples of health and wellness writing. Click on the links and you can see some of the work that I've done. And if you want, you can grade it yourself. See if it hits the 4 goals. So at this point, I am going to turn the mic back over to Jacob. Oh, good. Oh, we have so much time for Q&A. Wonderful. Jacob, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Wonderful. Great.
So I'm just curious, Meredith, you gave some examples of if you'll stop sharing screen, then it'll probably
Yeah.
post. Yeah.
Stop share. There we go.
There we go.
And turn the video back on.
So there you are. So
Here
you
I
gave
am.
some examples of how pulling the threads of things that were going on in your own life led you then to research those topics and start writing about them. I wonder if you could interact with, let people raise their hand or something, and maybe just have some, I wonder about this. So if you are sitting here in this class and going, I wonder if this would be something we could explore, then I would like you to talk with Meredith about that and get a chance to pull that thread a bit more.
Absolutely. Sounds like you're talking about maybe we can even do a little bit of brainstorming together.
Exactly.
I would love that. I would love that. I would love to do something really practical right now. Let's do it.
Yeah, because I just loved that as you were talking about, you have this background in writing and education about writing, but then you got into this field. What helped you and as I'm talking, if anybody wants to explore this together with Meredith, just raise your hand. What led you across the line to say, I actually want to turn this into a career path, like earning money at it?
Sure. That's a great question. And you know what? I'm going to take it back a step and talk a tiny bit about my career as a writer, just to kind of give you a little bit of background. So I don't know about you guys, but when I was in school, I got the message that being a writer is something that you do as a hobby. It's something that you do for fun, and it is fun. But I was given the message that it is not something you make money at, let alone a career. So for a number of years, I was a social worker. I was a full-time volunteer at a homeless shelter in California. And then I did, what did I do? I did sales and I did customer service, and I was so miserable. And then I decided, the saying about how you just need to jump out of the plane and then build your parachute on the way down. That's what I did. I dove into freelance writing and I just started doing it. And I was forced to do it because it was literally my only income. And that's why I ended up being a writer. How I ended up specializing in this is a much shorter story, and it is the least complicated part of the story. Basically, I got lucky. I decided that I wanted to switch from freelance writing to a traditional position with 401ks and health insurance and all that other stuff that is just so precious when you're freelancing. So I started applying for everything because I had experience with everything. At that point, I had done every type of writing you can think of as a freelancer. And so I took all of that, put it together in a resume that made slight sense, sent it to everywhere. Cleveland Clinic chose me not because I had experience as a nurse or as a doctor. They chose me not because I had gone to school for medical writing. They chose me because they saw that between my experience and I had just finished my master's degree, that I was trainable, that I could learn. This type of writing, you're probably not going to major in college, but you can pick it up. You can learn it through books, podcasts, classes like this. Start to build a portfolio. So I just want to encourage you all. I want to encourage you all to not listen to the voice that says you can't make a career out of this. And I wasn't going to say this before, but I want to put a number on this for you. When I say that you can make a career of this, I live in Ohio. I was, for the most part, making 30, 40,000 a year, 30 as a freelancer, 40 doing some other writing jobs that were full-time. When I got into Cleveland Clinic and started doing health and wellness writing, I went from getting 40 to almost 70. This can pay well. This can give you a good living. And when you move up into editor positions and management positions, you can get into the 6 digits. So I say that because I want you to understand in more than words. I want you to see the numbers here too, how that is possible. Does anybody have, how did Jacob phrase that? Brainstorming, yeah.
Yeah, while we're waiting for any questions to come in,
Yeah.
I would love to, how do you go about looking for a place? Some of these places seem so big and maybe intimidating to even know where to start. How would you go about sending an inquiry in about submitting an article or a piece?
That is a great question. So for one of the places I spoke of, Health Day, I had never heard of them before. I barely understood what they did, but a friend of a friend was an editor. And even though they were not at all showing any signs of hiring people, they listened to me when I emailed them and said, I'm available. I heard you're a good place to work for, and I can show you what I can do. So the thing about finding those types of jobs, yes, it's about networking. Yes, it's about figuring out an editor's email and taking a chance. But more than anything, it's just about bravery. It's just about saying to yourself, I am worthy of this type of job and I'm going to pursue it. I would say that more than anything is what's important. And there are tips and tricks. You figure things out as you go. But I would say that is the most important part. And I see that we have a couple questions here. I'm going to go ahead and read them.
Yeah, and before you do that,
Yeah.
Meredith, so but if I'm not looking to actually get like a paid career job, but I
Hmm.
just want to start submitting to these online outlets,
Hmm.
where do I go? Do I go to their website and then I go to their contact us? How do you start submitting? If you're not submitting an application, you just want to do some writing for them.
Sure. You're talking about like one-off things
Yeah, or
or for a
freelancing. Yeah.
magazine or yeah, something like that. So what you're going to look for when you go on their website, they use a couple different phrases. More than likely, you're going to say something you're going to see something along the lines of editorial guidelines. So anything about editing, the word submission, you might see. I want to add an extra piece of advice to that. If you're going to submit a piece of writing to someplace like Health Day or to a magazine like US News and World Report online or to a magazine like even Cosmo, read, read. The last thing you want to do when you're trying to build a career is to create this amazing content and then to get an email back saying, thank you. That was a lovely piece of work. But we published a similar piece of content back in 2016. But we appreciate your time. Have a nice day. And I can say that because I've gotten many of those emails before. And I finally learned that researching these places and more importantly, reading them. So, so vital. So vital. And not just to make sure you're not repeating the work, but because you need to see their style,
Hmm.
you need to see their voice, how they do things. Do they use bullet points? Do they use long or short paragraphs? Things like that you need to pay attention to.
Mhm.
Did that answer your question, Jacob?
Yeah, and while
Good.
you were talking, I just did a quick search on what online health
Mm-hmm.
wellness magazines accept submissions, freelance submissions. And so if anybody wants to click that in the chat, you can look at my search or you can put a similar search in. And there's all these things. Once you have a list like that, Meredith, like the one I just pulled
Yes.
up, how do you start sorting out and going, okay, I don't want to waste my time. And some of these things are trying to sell me how to write these things.
Yep.
How would I know where to start?
That's an excellent question. And I actually just pulled up what you put in chat in the first website. If you guys want to follow along with me, the first website, Write Life. The second website, Freedom with Writing. Third website, Make a Living with Writing. I can tell you now, these are all decent places
Hmm.
to find freelance writing opportunities. So, finding or getting connected to these types of freelancing jobs, you make an account, you start looking at what they're interested in. Places like this, you won't even have to go to the website for the magazine. They could have all the information you need right there that you can access through your account. Now, Freedom with Writing, I believe, if I remember correctly, is a paid account. I forget if Write Life is, and I think Make a Living Writing is. But there are other places that you don't need an account or you don't need to buy any sort of premium for. And when you get into these, a lot of times there will be direction. A lot of times there won't be. So you may be told this place, let's see, healthy living, inside fitness, places like that. Let's say they want an article about running and they give you no other information. Again, That's where you do research, where you start reading and where you dive into what they've published in the past. So I really want to encourage you that if you do look into this kind of stuff, remember to do the research. Remember that you don't necessarily have to pay any premium, but it does help. And I want you to also remember that even if you submit something to, what was another one? To Whole Life, to Pause, even if you submit something to them and they don't pick it up, that's okay. It's okay for 3 reasons. You can send it somewhere else. It gave you practice with this type of writing. And you have something for the portfolio that you are putting together that will eventually help you get other jobs.
I'm seeing some good questions coming into here through chat too. Are you noticing
Good.
those?
Yeah, let's see here.
I'll read them to you. How about
Oh,
that
please
way you
do.
don't have
Please
to.
do.
Let's
Yes.
start and let's do a lightning round on these because I want to make sure and get any other questions in here. So this first one is I'm curious how ChatGPT and other AI programs are going to affect this sort of career.
Mhm. That's a great that's a great question. And here's the thing, Jacob. I told myself this morning this question is going to come up, and I put some thought into it.
Mm-hmm.
So, some careers are bulletproof. If there's a zombie apocalypse tomorrow, we're going to still need doctors. We're going to still need nurses. Are we going to need writers? Maybe not. If there's a pandemic tomorrow, oh yeah, you're going to need writers. AI writing will never fully replace us. And I'm not just talking about health and wellness writers, I'm talking about writers in general. Because, not to get meta, AI doesn't have a soul. To be more specific, AI can do its best to reach out across the internet and get information. Could AI maybe put together decent health and wellness content? Maybe. What they can't do is the creative stuff, like when I was talking about describing the meridians and acupuncture as rivers. The other thing they can't do is interpret health statistics.
Mm.
For example, if you are doing research, you find a recent research report, somebody did an experiment. Some people came to a particular conclusion. For instance, in the medical journal I just told you about, those particular researchers looked into, does this type of exercise help fibromyalgia, or does this type? Now, if you go to that research, you can pluck out the human parts of that. You can pluck out the number parts of that AI can't interpret it because it's qualitative, not quantitative. You can look at the numbers and find the qualitative recommendations and information. So this type of writing is always going to be needed because we as health and wellness writers are going to have specific skills that AI cannot replace. And frankly, not in a million years would I trust an AI article on health and wellness because they may be polling from WebMD.com. They could also be polling from some random person's blog. who had, not to make this joke again, but who had a Flintstones vitamin and claims that it cured cancer. It's not necessarily going to be able to differentiate. And that is why the training we have is so important. That is another thing that makes us unique.
That's really good. And I just want to make sure we get to the rest of these. So let's see.
Yes, of
Have
course.
you
Go ahead.
found that similar types of writing positions are also found in the alternative medicine realm as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. I spoke earlier about acupuncture, which is categorized as sometimes categorized uh, in the holistic realm and in the alternative medicine realms. So when you're writing about holistic types or alternative types of medications, of treatments, of procedures, let's say there isn't a clear X, Y, and Z experiment proving 1, 2, 3 is correct. There may not be. But here's what you do. You state that. You state this information that I'm sharing with you is gathered from these places. These are these people's recommendations and personal experiences. So there is, absolutely, there is a market for that type of writing. And that would be a little bit different because it would be different sources and it would be different types of approaches to things. But yeah, if that's something you want to look into,
There's another
definitely
one coming
do.
in. Says, hi,
Yeah.
Meredith. This is
Yes.
Brianna. Thanks for all the helpful information. What process of review to use for content on the back end? I'm specifically curious about topics related to mental health and what disclaimers may be needed when crafting content without a background in mental health. Are there steps that should always be incorporated?
Yes, absolutely. So when you are, and mental health is my very, very favorite topic, very favorite topic. I don't have a background in medicine, in mental health education, none of that. Here's the thing though, the doctor who works for the magazine does. The doctor who works for the hospital does. You have safety nets left and right. If you write something that is incorrect or that could even hurt somebody, they're going to catch it. They will catch it. So when I write about mental health, I do my very, very best with the sources, with the information I know. But I know I have this safety net, and that gives me a lot of confidence that it'll be okay if I mess up. That's always ready for you.
I'm curious about any other questions that might want to come in here about, I just can imagine, and I've chatted with people, with those of us in the groups, and it's like, wow, I have been writing nonfiction work for a while. I've also had these health issues that I've found cures for in my life, and I would love to share them. And one thing that I am curious about, Meredith, I really loved that you told some stories about, real people experiencing these or your own experience. I'm curious, what qualifies as a way to frame up a piece that would actually be unique and bring a fresh perspective to an already, there's so much content, it's so much information out there. What makes it specifically relevant and interesting? Like why would my story on this topic stand out? How do I make it stand out?
Sure.
How do you do that?
Sure. And one of the most important words you just used, Jacob, is story. One of the jobs that I'm working right now is I'm a blogger for WebMD. And if you would Google Meredith Morckel, WebMD, you would see my latest blog post. I believe the title is Fibromyalgia Fog Cost Me $4,000. Now, I work for what's called a patient blog. It's not a medical blog. It's not a blog with medical recommendations. It's a blog strictly about my experience as an individual living with fibromyalgia.
Okay.
This is another market. This is another angle you can come in at. So I had a wild experience where, because of the disease that I cope with every day, I accidentally flooded my entire apartment. Those types of stories people love to read because it makes what they are experiencing so real beyond what the clinical and scientific content says. So if you're sitting here thinking, I don't want to read medical journals, that's boring, don't worry. If you're looking for a place where you can share your story, that's out there too. Even if it means starting your own blog, you can look for that. You can find that kind of stuff. And the WebMD blog that I work for, they have patient blogs for like 30 or 40 other conditions, including depression, anxiety, mental health things, including different types of cancers, different types of bone diseases, all sorts of things. Again, research. If you have a story to share, there's got to be somebody out there who wants to share it.
Yeah, so I feel like that's a really important point you just made, and I dropped the link to your profile on WebMD in there, and then I also dropped the patient blogs link. I just love that you're helping us understand better how to find a toehold here. If it's like, oh, I think I do have a story, and this is going to be background information and what I've found useful, I think that makes it feel a lot more accessible than thinking I need to gain mastery to the point where I'm sharing new information that doctors and other writers haven't already shared.
Sure. And what's helpful is being up to date on things. So if I get an assignment to write about type 2 diabetes, there are a lot of people out there who have heard the same information over and over again. You know what they haven't heard is about the study that came out 3 weeks ago about a new drug and how it helps. So when you want to find an angle, when you want to find subjects that nobody else has written about, that is where you go. You go to what's been happening recently in medicine. Start there. Yeah.
One thing I'm also noticing here, and this follows along with, what I know about other areas, Meredith, but when I'm looking at this patient blog section on WebMD, it's so interesting how specifics, like there's a whole category, I can't even probably pronounce it, ankylosing spondylitis. You probably know how to pronounce
Ankylosing spondylitis.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so that's something obviously I'm not even aware of, but it's a niche. And atopic dermatitis, and I'm just moving to, like, we know about the great big ones like breast cancer or ADD, but here's COPD, Crohn's disease. I mean, the nichier it is, it looks like now it's like you might be surprised if when I'm saying you, I'm saying any of us, when you're thinking, well, what would I have to share? I have this very specific condition and I've really been dealing with it. It looks to me like being focused in a niche can really be helpful. Do you find that accurate?
Oh yeah. And wouldn't you say, Jacob, that's part of the trick of honing a writing career in general, is finding your niche. Yes. So my personal niche is I have been living with fibromyalgia since I was a teenager. I've been living with clinical depression since I was, since about almost 20 years ago. So those things that are unique about me, that make me who I am, that give me a unique perspective, that becomes my niche.
Mm.
And if you are brave enough to reveal to the world that you are coping with these things, if you are maybe dumb enough to embarrass yourself online, like I can be, admitting that I flooded my apartment. If you can do that, if you can find your niche and you can really put it to work, oh gosh, yeah. Is there going to be quite as much of an audience for Crohn's disease as there is for type 2 diabetes? Maybe not necessarily, but think of it this way. ADHD, Crohn's disease, autoimmune disorders, mental health in general. I'm not saying these are new topics, but for lack of a better phrase, they've become popular topics, and you can take advantage of that. I have a cousin who has lupus, and so one thing I did was interview her about what it's like to live with that disease, and then I wrote about it.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, there are so many avenues into a career for this. And another thing that I like about being a writer in general is that I get to learn and I get to educate. And the other thing is that I get to then learn new things about lupus, go to my cousin, say, I saw this research report from a month ago. They're saying try this. So this can be helpful for your career. It can be helpful in your personal life as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be helpful when the next time you go to the doctor's office, you can have better conversations with your own doctors.
I just wonder, we are going to be coming toward the end of this pretty soon, but I'm just curious if anybody wants to mouse over the reactions button and raise your hand and actually chat with Meredith directly.
Oh, please do.
Um,
Tired of hearing my own voice.
well, one thing I know about some of the people here in the group today is that, you know, there are people who have been taking care of a parent or a child, long-term care at home. There are people here who no doubt have been dealing with a child or a brother, sister, mother, father who has been dealing with a very specific condition. And or perhaps like you, Meredith, you know, with some of the things you've mentioned, you know, these are things that are so personal because they're things you've actually had to struggle with and learn about and find ways of coping with or healing in some way. And so I think knowing that, that your experience has value, your experience of, you know, caring for a loved one for a long, long time, and talking about that. When when you think about reading Anne Lamott on parenting, for example, well, she's not a child psychologist, but she writes so honestly and so vulnerably and openly about being a parent that anyone who's a parent can't help but read that stuff and laugh and probably cry a little bit and go, I'm not alone. And so, Meredith, I have to think that a lot of people in this class and those catching it by replay will suddenly see themselves in the mirror and go, oh my God, I do have something that other people need to hear about, my experience of it. And I'm just curious if you have any other thoughts about that. Like, how do I take a relatable experience and then weave it into something that can be really genuinely useful nonfiction in the health world?
Sure. And since you brought up Anne Lamott, I mean, I remember reading her talking about Sam when I was, gosh, 18, maybe 18, maybe it's young as that. And I certainly wasn't a parent. I'm not a parent now, but wow,
Mm-hmm.
it's in my head. it is still memorable. You know, you don't necessarily have to have the exact same experience as somebody for it to be meaningful and relatable. And I'm glad that you brought up the word vulnerable, Jacob. I was searching for that word earlier. So important if you want to do personal health and wellness writing.
Mm.
Now, on the topic of, excuse me, on the topic of caregivers, yes, another niche market. If you look at support groups that are national, international, there are plenty for caregivers for a specific condition. And I also love, Jacob, that you brought up the phrase, you are not alone. You're not alone as a writer. You're not alone as a caregiver. You're not alone as somebody who is going through a condition. And if you can find a place in your own story that you want to share, that you know would be meaningful, there's somebody out there who's going to read it. And Jacob, you asked specifically about what can we do with our own personal stories and then make it relatable and make it meaningful and make it publishable in general. So real quick example from my work with WebMD, working on the fibromyalgia blog. I wrote about, I think last month I wrote about what it's like to juggle multiple conditions. So I live with fibro, depression, anxiety, POTS. I live with lactose intolerance. I live with psoriasis. I actually in the article go through the whole list. The reason why I did that is if somebody who has something like sleep apnea, like I have, if they find this article is not just for people who have fibromyalgia. Other people can relate to it. And it's along the lines of Anne Lamott's content about parenting really spoke to me. And I hope that my content about the struggle of having to cope with all of these at the same time, I hope somebody else can read that and say, oh my goodness, that's like me. I hope they read it and they can see that in a very vulnerable way, I say, this is awful. It is terrible. But another thing that I do in that article is after I make a list of the conditions that I'm going through, of the things that are bad or hurting my body, the very next thing I do is go through the things that are awesome about my body. I have awesome dance moves. I have a very cute potato-shaped birthmark. I like my eyes. So that component, you could argue, not only does it cover fibromyalgia, but there's a mental health example there. I'm modeling, if you have this list in your head of everything that's bad, time out, make a list of everything that's good. So there's a lot of I guess multitasking in this type of content if that's how you choose to do it.
I'm just curious how many, and open up your chat box, folks, if you would, and respond. How many of you have been publishing on some version of your own blog, or you've been accepted, you know, as a submission for an article or a piece in some other blog? Doesn't have to be medical related or wellness related. I'm just curious, how many of you have already been doing that? And I have a reason for asking. I'll just say that when I started writing 10, okay, Denise says yes, I guess more like 13 years ago is when I officially started writing. Um, Early on, I started publishing on my own just total mess of a WordPress blog, and I've shared that before. You can search it if you want, rowdycreator.wordpress.com, and you'll see I was not great at graphics. I was not great at almost any of it, but it's where I started writing. And the other day I went back looking for an article that I had written just so I could see it, and I was like, oh my God, I really wrote a lot back then. But then shortly thereafter, a couple of the pieces I wrote on my personal blog, some friends of mine online said, oh, this, you should really check with Elephant Journal.
Mm.
And that led to me writing for Elephant Journal for a while, and also for Good Men Project. I'm saying this, Meredith, because a lot of times, let's see, Denise says, I have, Rachel says, not yet. Yeah, no, I just want you to understand, a lot of times we have this horizon out there of, I'll be a published writer when,
Mhm.
and understand that if you've published something on your blog and you've had 3 people read it, you probably don't feel like I'm a published writer. The truth is you are. You have published, you've put something out into the world.
Oh yeah.
And then when you get invited up into these larger, platforms, even then I didn't feel like a published writer, even though, thousands of people were reading my writing at that point. I wasn't getting a paycheck. It wasn't, an official book at the official library. So I didn't feel like a writer. But I just want to say, if you have been publishing, or if you take some of Meredith's advice here and start getting published, it will break down this idea that you aren't a writer, that you aren't a real writer, or that you can't be published. I saw you nodding your head, Meredith.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. You know what I always say to that, Jacob, and you can all be the judges of whether there's any wisdom to that. Here's what people mix up. People think that writing is an accomplishment, that it is like something you earn, something like a degree that you have to go through many years of training to get to. Writing is not like a job title. It's not like fireman, because I learned to be a fireman. It's not like doctor, because I trained to be a doctor. You're not a writer because you accomplished X, Y, and Z. You are a writer because it is your identity. And that is different than an accomplishment. That's who you are versus what you do.
Mhm.
Who you are is a writer. What you do, that's gravy. That's great. But when it comes to claiming that title, it's identity. It all comes down to that.
That's one of the reasons in the writing retreat private group, I put out a challenge yesterday for everyone to go on Instagram and post something that says I'm a writer, and a bunch of people have done it, and I just love that. And it's not an artificial thing. It's for the exact reason you just said, Meredith. It is a sense of identity. And of course, I don't see ourselves looking for a single purpose in life, like I'm a writer, or I'm a nurse, or I'm a whatever. That's one of my life purposes, but it's so important in beginning to step into the reality of this being true for me, to begin to claim it and to realize,
Claim. Mhm.
if you've written something in the chat today, you're a writer. I
Well,
love what Kira just says. Writing is a soul calling vocation. I love that.
I
Yes.
was about to point that out. That is so beautiful. A soul calling. Oh, that's beautiful, Karen.
Well, we've been here. I can't believe we've been here an hour and a half, and I want to respect your time and everyone's time today. Meredith, do you have any last thoughts here? And of course, you'll be back in the groups on Facebook, I know, and able to answer more questions and things. But yeah, anything else you want to just leave us with before we go?
Yes, I will leave you with this thought. I've only for about a month and a half now been running the WebMD Facebook group for people living with fibromyalgia. And I've always heard the concept of not being alone. I've always thought of that as perhaps a little cliche, or simply perhaps overdone. But I tell you what, that is the message that the group members have been communicating more than anything, is that when they're in this group together, they feel like they're not alone. And what you can do with your writing is also help them feel like they're not alone, whether that's sharing your story or whether that is sharing a statistic like 3 million people in the United States are living with fibromyalgia. That helps them say to themselves, okay, millions, I'm definitely not alone.
Mm-hmm.
So you are not alone as a writer. You are not alone as somebody who's trying to write. And if you do dive in to health and wellness writing, you are not alone in that either. There are a lot of us doing it. We're doing it successfully. We're doing it sometimes on our own and sometimes at real jobs, as they say. And it is important writing. By that, I mean, I'm not selling a Q-tip. I'm selling this is something that can change and even save your life.
I love that.
I am so, so very happy to see your faces. I hope this was helpful. Thank you, Jacob, for this opportunity, for moderating all of this. And thank you all for coming. What is your last word, Jacob?
Well, I just want to thank you for doing this, Meredith. And this is your first workshop publicly, isn't it? I think we should all just celebrate you for being willing. I see a bunch of hands clapping on the screens here. Yeah, I think it's really important to celebrate this for you and with you, and also for sharing your knowledge of how you got started and what led you to it, you know. And I will when I send the replay out, I will make sure that your email and web links and all that are in there so folks can. I'm just curious. I'm going to put you on the spot here, Meredith. I wonder if you would be willing, if people are interested in having you look over a potential piece or an idea, if you're willing to have them email that to you and have you look it over and give some comments.
100%. 100%. Like Jacob said, this is my first time doing any sort of class. Any sort of feedback would be delightful. And I would be so delighted to help you guys in any way I can.
Yeah.
Even if it's just clarifying something I said today, or if it's just saying, you know what, this is ready for publication or this is not. I'd be happy to do that.
That's
yeah,
wonderful.
And thank you for bringing that up, Jacob. I appreciate that.
Well, I don't want to overwhelm you with submissions, but on the other hand, I really think that could be a vital service in helping some people get off the blocks and actually start submitting their work out there. You know, because, and I think I loved what your advice, Meredith, on go to some of these large wellness outlets, these platforms, and read through some of the articles, and then go to their patient blogs. That was a term I didn't know before today. You'll very quickly start to realize, oh my God, there are reasons for me to share what I have to share in these places. And your points about style and length and, you know, how technical or not, I mean, all of those things, I think that's a way to really feel like, oh, I do have something that could work here.
Yes. And this is a bit cliche, but we all have a story. We all have stories that people can relate to and find valuable. And you know what, if you're at the point in your career and you're not sure if you're ready to take the step to publication, there are websites like The Mighty that does mental health content, where you can voluntarily put up content. You can voluntarily talk about your stories. And again, is that published? Yes. Again, can you show that later to a potential employer? Yes. Even if you're not getting paid for something, you can use that to enhance your career later, for sure. Yeah. And you can do it anonymously. If you're not even at the point where you want to put your name out there, whatever point you're at, there is an avenue, there is an opportunity to find.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you're reinforcing the idea that every time we put something out there and it gets accepted, it gets published, or even that we send it in, for God's sakes. Just the act of doing that erodes a little bit more of that barrier that says, I'm not a real writer. Every time we do that, something inside begins to change a little bit more and says, no, I am a writer. I actually am a writer. So
Oh, for sure. For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, practice makes perfect. And the best way to get rid of imposter syndrome is to just submit. Just do it over and over and over and over and over and over. Like you said, wear it down.
all right, y'all. Well, I love you. Thank you for being here. And we'll make sure and send this replay out and then hit Meredith up in the Facebook groups to talk about these things more. Meredith, thank you so much for sharing today. This has been great.
Thank you, Jacob, very, very much. I hope you all have a lovely day.